Hello.
Good evening, everyone. We'll get started in just a minute here. We're just getting everybody in. Good evening, everyone. I'm just getting my screen set up here. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. We're now live, and I would like to welcome everyone to this public meeting to gather feedback on the proposed changes to the Aberdeen and Pacific Way Elementary School catchment boundaries. I'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting tonight on the traditional territory of the Secwepemc people. I'm joined this evening by trustees and Vice Chair Megan Wade, Trustee Joseph Small, Trustee Kara McKelvey, Trustee Kathleen Karpak, Trustee John O'Fee, Trustee Diane Jules, and Trustee Heather Grieve, and Trustee Shelley Sim. I'd like to thank you all for joining us. I do send Trustee Sim's regrets as she is having some slight technical difficulties and unable to turn on her camera. Before I turn the evening over to Superintendent Sullivan, I would ask trustees if they have any comments or remarks that they would like to make before we begin the evening. Feel free to raise your hands. Okay, seeing none. Thank you everyone for joining us. Because of the format of this evening, once we begin the meeting, trustees will fade into the background, but we'll all be listening carefully to the feedback as presented. So I would like to turn the evening over now to Superintendent Sullivan. And thank you all again for joining us.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for attending this public meeting regarding the proposed changes to the catchment areas for Aberdeen Elementary School and Pacific Way Elementary School. I want to outline how we would like to proceed this evening. I will first ask Mr. Art McDonald, our Director of Facilities, to give an overview of these changes so there is an understanding of why staff is proposing these changes to the Board of Education. Following Mr. McDonald's presentation, I will then ask Ms. Trish Smiley, the Assistant Superintendent of Elementary Education, to comment on the educational impact of the proposed changes. And after Assistant Superintendent Smiley makes her comments, I will then ask the Secretary Treasurer, Mr. Kelvin Stretch, to make comments with respect to any financial impact that might occur as a result of these proposed changes. After Secretary Treasurer Stretch has made his comments, we will then begin listening to submissions on the proposed changes by those who have pre-booked a time on the agenda for this evening. Those who have booked a time to make a presentation this evening have been allotted a 10-minute time period to make your presentation. We would ask that you please respect the 10-minute allotment so that everyone will have an opportunity to make their presentation. I will be giving a 2-minute signal prior to the completion of the 10-minute allotment so that those making a presentation will have an opportunity to sum up. We intend to complete our meeting no later than 8:30 p.m. In addition to the formal presentations this evening, we will also be providing an opportunity for those of you who want to raise a question or make a comment through either Facebook Live or our YouTube stream. We may not be able to answer all these questions this evening, but any questions that we cannot answer tonight will be posted on the Aberdeen Packway consultation page, which is linked from the Aberdeen Packway and the district websites, along with a response to the question. That public link for comments will also remain open until June the 4th, so members of the public can post questions and receive a response throughout the consultation period. All questions and responses to questions will remain viewable publicly throughout the consultation period. In addition to the public meeting this evening, I will also be meeting with the PAC executive of each affected school, and our assistant superintendents will also be meeting with the staff of each affected school. All the information and input obtained through these consultation meetings will be consolidated and presented to the Board of Education prior to the board meeting making any decision on these proposed changes. As indicated by the board chair in her introduction, all members of the Board of Education are present this evening to listen to your presentation, but I want to stress that no decision will be made this evening. That decision on the changes will be made at the public board meeting on June the 14th. That completes the outline of the process we will follow this evening. We would now like to proceed with your, actually, I want to, that completes the outline of the process we will follow. I would like to turn things over to our Director of Facilities, Mr. McDonald, who's going to give us an overview of these proposed changes.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Sullivan. I'm just going to share my screen. So we're here tonight to discuss the Aberdeen Pacific Way Elementary consultation and the proposed catchment changes. Dr. Sullivan's already gone through the agenda for the evening. I'll be giving a bunch of slides that are taken out of this year's long-range facility plan just to provide some context as to where the district is, and more specifically, the southwest sector of Kamloops. So just some background information for everybody's knowledge is school catchments are not permanent. Each school has a limited capacity and the neighborhood it serves is constantly changing. Changing demographics and legislative changes can affect the enrollment of a school, and periodically the Board of Education will review school enrollments relative to catchment areas and make changes where necessary. And this year, the board is considering changing 4 catchment boundaries, as well as the reopening of Ralph Bell Elementary for September 2022. Again, for some context, these are the enrollment projections provided to the board in this year's long-range facilities plan. Quite robust, quite steady, 200 to 250 additional students per year, going out at least the next 10 years and probably after that. Again, for some context, district-wide capacity utilization. Capacity utilization is basically the enrollment divided by the school capacity as defined by the Ministry of Education. And you can see just over 10 years ago, we were at about 77% district-wide. This year, we're at 92%. In sort of 5 years, projected to be at 98%, and in 10 years at 105% district-wide. More specifically for this meeting, in the Kamloops area, our school capacity utilization, you can see this year at elementary, we're at 116%. Secondary, we're at 97%. 5 years out at elementary, 123%, with secondary at 99%. And 10 years out at elementary, 133%. and at secondary 107%. As noted at the bottom, these numbers take into account the addition of Valley View Secondary, which should be completed by September 2022, as well as the new Parkcrest Elementary for February 2024. Again, from the long-range facilities plan, we've identified areas with significant enrollment pressures, elementary schools, Westmount Elementary, Juniper Ridge Elementary, Pacific Way Elementary, McGowan Park Elementary, Dallas Elementary, and Dufferin Elementary. And you can see they're all way, well over capacity, and with the projected enrollments will be significantly over capacity in the not too distant future. Similarly with the high schools, the South Shore Secondary Schools in particular, Sahalee Secondary, South Kamloops Secondary, and Valley View Secondary. Sahalee and Valley View well over capacity, South Cam slightly below, but forecast to grow a little bit into the future. In the long-range facility plan, we talk about our implementation strategy, which is how are we going to deal with all this growth going into the future based on the enrollment projections. So for the Southwest sector, which tonight's meeting is part of, in our capital plan, we have ministry funded capital projects. We've got a new elementary school in Pineview Valley, a new elementary school in Aberdeen East, which will be added to this year's capital plan, and then further down the road, a new elementary school in Aberdeen West. As interim measures to deal with what we're dealing with right now, catchment review for Aberdeen Elementary and Pacific Way Elementary to relieve some pressure at Pacific Way Elementary. And this will result in portables at Aberdeen Elementary. What we're trying to achieve is to, share the pressure between some of the schools rather than having one school at 200% capacity and another at 100%. We're trying to share that a bit. And then further down the road, once Pineview Valley Elementary is built, another catchment review between McGowan Park and Pacific Way Elementary, as McGowan Park will have space once Pineview Valley Elementary is built. In the secondary category for the Southwest sector, on our capital plan, we have a new secondary school in Aberdeen. And we've also recommended a catchment review for Sahalee Secondary and South Kamloops Secondary to relieve pressure at Sahalee Secondary. And again, at some point, this will require more portables at South Kamloops Secondary. And we've also recommended review shifting some of the international student population at Sahalee Secondary to other secondary schools, again, to relieve some pressure at Sahalee Secondary. Interim measures, again, this is something that's provided to the board every year just to give them a snapshot of what we think we're going to need to do. Until the school district receives capital funding for projects from the ministry, the school district needs to respond to enrollment pressures internally. We're looking at repurposing 22 rooms for classrooms. That ranges from rooms that are currently vacant in some of our more rural schools to potentially music rooms and converting those to classrooms. And we're looking at adding 35 portables over the next 5 years. As I mentioned, we have a pretty robust capital plan. The first 5 priorities for new schools are Pineview Valley, Bachelor Heights, a secondary school in Aberdeen, an elementary school in Juniper West, a K-12 school in Sun Peaks, and as I mentioned previously, a new school in Aberdeen East to be included in next year's capital plan. Now, the specifics of the proposed Aberdeen Elementary, Pacific Way Elementary catchment change. According to the City of Kamloops official community plan, the Southwest sector is the highest growth area within Kamloops over the near and long-term future. And that's mainly due to the fact that that's where the bulk of the remaining developable land is in the City of Kamloops. And in order to create somewhat consistent and manageable enrollment at the Southwest sector schools, portables will need to be added to schools. And that's also why we're recommending some catchment changes, as I alluded to earlier, to share some of the pressure between schools. So these charts were in a report that the superintendent provided to the board. The upper table, which I will try to sort of flag my cursor over. These are the current enrollment projections for McGowan Park, Aberdeen, and Pacific Way. We typically group schools, what the ministry calls neighborhood schools. You can see right now, the two schools we're looking at, Pacific Way, over the next 10 years looks to head towards 600 students, whereas Aberdeen Elementary stays pretty consistent in the low 400 range. The bottom table shows what happens if we make the proposed catchment change between Aberdeen and Pacific Way. You can see Aberdeen goes from the low 400s up to around 500, and Pacific Way slowly grows, but then gets quite large again at 500 and over. So the specifics, and I will show a couple of catchment maps in a second. Shift the areas, Bentall, Talbot, Willowbrae, Rayburn, Galbraith, and Telford from Pacific Way Elementary to the Aberdeen Elementary catchment area. Based on our numbers for 2022, this would affect about 80 students that are currently attending Pacific Way Elementary. So here's the maps in the sort of yellow area over here. This is the current Pacific Way catchment boundary. The red is the current Aberdeen Elementary catchment. On the right here, these are the proposed changes. So you can see this area has changed from yellow to red, and that's the proposed area for the catchment change. Just at a larger scale, just zooming into that area. So Talbot, Willowbrae, Bentall, Rayburn, Telford over here. So that's the proposed area for the catchment change. And that concludes my report, Dr. Sullivan. I'll now turn it over to Assistant Superintendent Smiley.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald. So I'm going to ask Assistant Superintendent Smiley now to make some comments with respect to the enrollment projections and some education pressures that also make us propose some changes to the catchment areas and boundaries.
Hello and good evening. The collective agreement defines the maximum class size for all classrooms in the district. This is the maximum total by grade. As you can see, it's indicated here in the chart. The maximum number of students is also affected by composition, which is the number of students designated as requiring low incident special educational needs. These designations lower the class size by 1 seat or 1 student per class. Class size maximums changed in 2017, increasing the need for further classrooms for students as the maximum number of students are lowered during this time. At school with already high operating capacities had specialty spaces such as music and learning assistance rooms changed to general classrooms. At this time, in addition to increasing student enrollment, some schools required the placement of portables. Next slide, please. As a result of the catchment area proposed changes, no changes to the educational programs are being proposed at either school. In the case of Aberdeen Elementary School, this means it will remain as a K-7 school with a Montessori program and a daycare. To accommodate the increased enrollment, 4 portables would be added to assist in preserving the specialty spaces in that school. Pacific Way Elementary will maintain a K-7 program, and 4 portables would remain on the site. It is possible that specialty spaces will be able to be reclaimed at Parkway Elementary, as these were claimed as general classrooms following 2017. Next slide, please. The other shift that may impact students as a result of the catchment area change is where students will track to secondary. Aberdeen students feed into South Cam Secondary School, as they do now. Pacific Way students would feed into Sahali Secondary School as they do now. If students move schools, they would as well fall into those feeder schools. Thank you. And over to Secretary Treasurer Stretch.
Yeah, thank you, Assistant Superintendent Smiley. So, Secretary Treasurer Stretch, if you could make some comments with respect to any financial impacts.
Hello. Thank you, Superintendent Sullivan. Good evening, everyone. Although catchment area changes tend not to have implications on funding that the district receives, I do want to share some basic information on how we are funded for day-to-day operations and how capital projects are funded, including space or portable classrooms. The presentation will be posted on our website, so you will not have to write out this very long link. But this is actually the link to the Ministry of Education K-12 funding operating grants website. And now this will provide details on all 60 school districts, and it actually goes all the way back to 2001-2002 school year. So you could actually go and look at any school district in the province, and you would get a pretty good feel for how the funding is allocated amongst the 60 school districts. So these, when we look at enrollment-based funding, this is more commonly referred to as full-time equivalent student funding. And so these 5 categories are the main categories of funding. So our standard school enrollment, continuing education, distributed learning, alternate schools, and homeschooling. And these FTE counts are calculated at September 30th each year, and that's done provincially. So this is our magic date for counting and receiving the funding based on the number of students we have. Next slide, please. This is some supplementary funding we received that we received for unique student needs. So we have special needs students, English language learning students, Indigenous education, adult education, and this is the non-graduated adults, and equity of opportunity supplements. Next slide. And finally, we do receive some additional supplements that have nothing to do with the number of students we have, but they're referred in the unique geographic factor section of the funding. So this is mostly for our rural communities. So we have small community supplement, a low enrollment factor, a rural factor, a climate factor, a sparseness factor, and a student location factor. And these are all calculated each year, and the district is funded based on these particular categories. Next slide, please. So one thing that's important to know that districts are not funded for space. So that the amount of space we occupy does not generate additional funding that the district can use for the education of our students. We do receive an AFG grant, which is the annual facility grant, but these are funds just used to maintain existing space. Districts are also not funded for portables, and a portable can cost you between $150,000 and $175,000. It can actually exceed that if you were to put washrooms in and things like that, but that is not something we tend to do. And it depends on sort of where the portable is located. Districts are not funded for this. In most cases, the ministry feel that if you add a portable, it's because of increased enrollment. Increased enrollment generates additional funding because of our per FTE student calculation. So we do not receive funding for portables. Now, the Ministry of Education, they approve and fund our capital expansions in any new schools. Director McDonald provided a list of the schools that we have listed in our capital plan for consideration over the next few years. Once approved, districts are expected to contribute to the capital project based on their ability to contribute. So basically what happens, we have a number of projects, and I've listed them at the bottom of the page where the district was approved for capital, and the ministry review our reserve balances and everything and determine how much the district can afford to contribute to some of these significant capital items. Also, if a school site is required, the district needs to ensure we have a school site acquisition charge in place. Now, the district has not had to purchase a school site for many, many years, but so that's why just recently we've worked with the city of Kamloops to ensure that we have a school site acquisition charge, because there's 2 or 3 sites within the city now that the district is working to acquire them for future growth, as indicated in Director McDonald's projections. So I've listed 3 of the projects, the only 3 projects, capital projects that were approved in the last 20 years. We had the trades addition at NorCam, and the district contributed 1.1 million. The Valley View expansion, which is currently happening now, the district is required to contribute 1.75 million. And the Park Crest, which is, we have to contribute to the expanded portion of the school, not for the original 350 student school. And so that additional cost is $300,000. So other than that, in most cases, we're just moving students from one school to another, and it doesn't generally affect our funding. It's really important for educational programming and managing space. So that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Stretch. And that completes the overview or the context that we wanted to provide to you for this evening. We would now like to proceed with your presentations. Presenters will appear in the order in which you registered. So when I call your name, I would ask you to please proceed with your presentation through the link that has been provided to you. And I will give you a 2-minute signal when you have 2 minutes left in your time allotment, so you can sum up. Our first presentation for this evening is Kirsten Servatius. Hopefully, Ms. Servatius, I'm pronouncing your name properly. So welcome, Kirsten, and please begin your presentation.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead, please.
Hi, I'm a parent at Pacific Way, and we do fall in within the catchment change. And I do hear your reasons for pressure of changing the school, but my big concern lies in the existing childcare issue that lies within Kamloops. And I know you're probably aware the city of Kamloops did a study in 2020 where they reviewed how many childcare spaces we were short in Kamloops. I know the school district 73 was involved with that, having Marianne Vanderpool part of that study, and they found that we were short about 7,000 childcare spaces in Kamloops. That being said, as parents, we are having to search out these childcare spaces from essentially infancy to accommodate before and after school care so we can go to work and send our kids to school, which is a challenge for many families. So I know I myself was on a childcare wait list for 3 years before getting before and after school care for my children once my son entered first grade. Now, there are no students leaving Aberdeen Elementary, so therefore there'll be no childcare spaces opening up for us. So this is a big issue and is causing my family a lot of stress and anxiety of how we're going to cope with these changes and what the school district's proposal is for the lack of childcare spaces and us having to give up the spaces we already have obtained when these before and after school cares only go to certain elementary schools. So that's really where my issue and concern lies, is in the childcare and how as parents we're going to accommodate this and adjust, because essentially it would lead to me having to leave my job to be able to do this catchment change. I won't take up the full 10 minutes because I think that covers essentially what I had to say.
Thank you, Ms. Servatius. This all, of course, is being recorded, and we will take your question and we will give you a response, and we'll post that to the website. So I think they're important questions, and we'll try our best to give you a comprehensive response to the questions that you've raised. Is there anything else that you would like to add?
No, that's it for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for taking the time to make a presentation and to be with us this morning, and of course, this evening, sorry. Yeah, I'm confused. So, but the board is listening, the board is here and listening, and so they've certainly heard your presentation, and they'll also be viewing the responses to your question.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Our next presentation is by Sebastian Fortan. So welcome, Sebastian. So please begin your presentation when you're ready.
Hello?
Good, we can see you and we can
Okay,
hear.
very good.
You're all set.
There's a lot happening on the screen, so I wasn't sure. So thank you for allowing me the time to ask a few questions, and my presentation will be brief. It's more about placing a few questions than presenting a case. So we currently have two kids attending Pacific Way at this point. Our third one has graduated from Pac Way and is now attending Saheli Secondary. So what there's a lot of information that was provided to us tonight. One thing that's still not clear to me at this point is the timing for implementing the proposed change in zoning for the school. I am curious to see if the district has considered the period of implementation, for example, completing a cycle. For example, those kids shall reach grade 6 or 7 before the change is implemented, for example. As well as, I mean, there's other avenues to control the student populations at Pac Way, for example, controlling the influx of new students and simply say we're at capacity, we can't take no additional ones. And also I'm curious to see what control the district or Pac Way itself has in essentially flushing out or preserving those students within catchment, because surely there are students attending Pac Way currently that are either from outside the Pac Way, the current or proposed Pac Way catchment, or even the Aberdeen ones. So from other catchments within the city. So those were my questions for tonight, and I hope that you consider answering them. Thank you.
We certainly will respond to them, and we'll post the answers to our website. One we can answer, I think, immediately. The question with respect to when these would take effect, and it will be September 2022, so a year from September. The capacity issue, of course, is more complicated because if we have students in the catchment, whether it's Aberdeen or Pacific Way, then they would be entitled to attend that school. And if they didn't attend that school, they would have to attend other elementary schools in Kamloops. And as Mr. McDonald has shown, we've got pressures in other areas of the city as well. The other question you raised, though, I think which is important, you have, I think I heard you say one of your children is presently at high school at Saheli?
That's right.
That's right. So in those situations, regardless of this catchment change, we would want to keep siblings together in the same high school. So regardless of that catchment change, those types of factors we will consider to keep families together, certainly when they go on to high school. The other questions we'll certainly respond to online, and I need to consult with our assistant superintendent so I can make sure that we've responded to your questions fully and properly.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Do you have any other questions you would like, or comments that you would like to make, Mr. Fortan?
I think I'm done for tonight. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll post that. Thank you very much for taking the time to be with us this evening, and we will make sure that your questions are responded to and posted. Thank you. Our next presentation is from Zen Fan. I'm sorry, that has been omitted. So our next presentation is Jason Pellet. So could you please begin, Jason, please begin your presentation.
Sorry, I was stuck on mute there. You can hear me now?
I can hear you. I don't see you. If you wanted to turn your video on so we can see you, you can, but if you'd rather just do it through audio, you can do it that way too, but we can hear
Yeah,
you.
I'll just do it through audio here. I'm in a dark room and I'll leave it at that. So
We can hear
yeah,
you.
well,
Go ahead.
okay, well, so thank you, Terry, and I appreciate the opportunity to comment on this as one of the parents affected by this proposed change. Just a bit of a background, my wife and I moved to Kamloops last fall for work. I live in the affected area that would be affected by this change. We have 2 kids at Pacific Way in grade 2 and kindergarten. Part of our house buying decision was the school, right? We had some family friends that are retired teachers who had really good things to say about Pathway. We knew it had really good test scores. We knew it had reasonable walkability from where we were looking to buy. Not up a large hill or crossing a major road. So that was an important buying decision, right? So to hear that the boundaries might change caught us a little bit off guard, and we were a little bit frustrated and worried about what this might mean. So overall, I'll just share some of the reasons why we're not in favor of the proposed change. First and foremost, the kids' mental health. Well, all our mental health has suffered with this pandemic the past year, but particularly the kids. With being on remote learning last year, and in our case, the move to Kamloops and the disruption that brings. And now these possible changes that'll affect both our kids in the near future. There's a recent article in the Vancouver Sun. 2/3 of kids in BC are now suffering mental health issues since the pandemic hit, up from 1/3. So this, in short, I think this is a really bad time to be separating kids from their cohorts and their friend groups such that they are right now, or even proposing to do so. The move to Kamloops and the pandemic and the contemplation of these changes has been hard on our eldest, our grade 2 child, who's really only settled into his new environment in the last couple of months. And I'll spare you the details, but went through some mental health struggles with that change. So we're worried about how that might flare up again with moving to a new school. Secondly, this seems to divide the neighborhood somewhat arbitrarily, cutting across streets and street corners, such that neighbors will end up going to different schools, their kids, I should say, and then on to different high schools. So it's a bit frustrating to me that the new boundary doesn't more fully enclose neighborhoods or specific developed areas rather than slicing across them. On that note, in my son's case, walking to Aberdeen School in the future, he would be walking through Pacific Way catchment areas to get to Aberdeen. So it just seems a bit frustrating in that regard. Transportation concerns is our next worry. All those kids up on the Bentall, Talbot area would have to go down all those stairs and cross Aberdeen Way, which is a busy road. People speed down the hill there. There's the curve, the traffic median, the trade median. So it's not a great spot for a lot of kids to be crossing that road. And in the wintertime as well, going down all those stairs with the snow and ice issues. So we're just worried about the safety issues and the difficulties in the wintertime with getting to and from that school versus Pacific Way. And on the subject of safety, I'm wondering if the district has thought about that and has talked to the city staff at all about what traffic safety improvements might need to be made at that crosswalk location. And fourthly, the timing of the change. The stress of this potential change is affecting our child, our eldest, and I'm sure others, which would probably be the case at the best of times, but especially made worse, especially now, and made worse by the pandemic. So it feels to us as affected parents like we're stuck in a difficult situation, knowing this is coming September after next, possibly. Do we worry about it for another year and have it on our minds, on our kids' minds? Or do we preemptively look at moving our kids for this coming September, but then we're stuck in a scramble to arrange childcare that much quicker, as you heard already, and the challenges with that, among other challenges. So those are some of the key concerns we have. But I didn't come on here just to vent and express frustrations. I was hoping I could share a few possible solutions as well. First of all, I understand that Pacific Way was built with future growth in mind, that it was designed for expansion. I don't know if that's true or not, but I'm curious to know if the district has looked seriously at expanding and building onto Pacific Way per that original design as part of the capital planning, with the intent of keeping that upper Aberdeen area together as much as possible with the catchment. Secondly, grandfathering in the kids right now that go to Pacific Way, is that something that could be looked at such that any people new moving into the neighborhood would go to Aberdeen, but that we preserve as much as possible the kids that go to Pacific Way right now for the reasons I already mentioned. Thirdly, we're just wondering if we're going to be going through this in another few years from now, if the Pineview area school has been built, and if the Aberdeen Way is eventually punched through to the west to connect with Pineview. Again, I don't know if the district has had those discussions with the city about that future build out and extension of the road, but conceivably that Pineview school could draw from the western part of Aberdeen. So it's kind of resetting the boundaries again. And we're just wondering how that's been factored in. I already mentioned the concerns with walkability, road safety, kids going up and down steep hills versus along a more level route to school. And just another suggestion or question, I guess, is if the district has reached out to their colleagues in other districts suffering the same challenges with major and rapid growth, such as Okanagan, Nanaimo, and if they have, what have they heard? What other innovative solutions are other school districts come up with? How are they dealing with it? So that was just a few possible solutions we had thought of. So just in closing here, I appreciate that the housing boom and ongoing growth is causing unprecedented challenges for the district in terms of enrollment, but any changes to catchments need to be done carefully and thoughtfully. This past year has been extremely difficult on families, and we are not in a great position to handle changes like this at the moment. We cannot underestimate how much of a role school plays in our children's mental health, and there are other social networks and extracurricular activities being currently curtailed. So I'd ask that the district go back to the drawing board and think about these boundaries changes more seriously and other possible solutions to deal with enrollment growth, and in the spirit of making the next few years a positive experience for our children. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Jason. I appreciate you've obviously given considerable thought to that, and we appreciate your insights and also appreciate your suggestions with respect to other alternatives that we might look at. And I can assure you that we have had some consideration, given some consideration to some of the things you suggested, but others we would need to explore in greater detail. So we will certainly have that discussion, and we will post responses to your suggestions and your questions on our website. I will add, you did raise a question about that is, of course, a number of good questions that you raised, and that was with respect to what other school districts are experiencing. The enrollment increases that we're seeing, I want to stress to those who are watching, we did predict those. I was here in 2002 when we were looking at enrollments, and we did predict that our enrollment was going to decline from then 18,000 students down to just under 14,000 by 2014, which is exactly what happened. And then we would see some increase in enrollment going forward from there. But we felt at the time that we wouldn't have any difficulty absorbing all of that enrollment. But there's one thing that we could not predict and did not predict, and that was a decision by the Supreme Court of Canada with respect to the class size, class composition case. And that is not a criticism of that decision. I want to make that clear. But what it did was it added immediately 4,100 teachers to school districts in British Columbia. And for us, that meant 97 additional teachers and 90 additional classrooms. So those 90 additional classrooms had to be found immediately. So without that, we certainly would have been able to absorb quite comfortably any increases in enrollment that we anticipated. But with that increase in classroom capacity that was immediately demanded, that's what led to the issues that we're in today. So I heard at one point that Surrey was looking at, I think, 200 portables in a district that size. So it is a problem that many districts are facing across the province, and we are certainly one of them. So I wanted to provide that overview. We will certainly address the good questions that you've raised, and I appreciate your taking the time to provide a very thoughtful presentation. Thank you, Jason. Our last scheduled presenter is Miss Allison Beach. So Allison, welcome, and please begin your presentation.
Sorry there, can you hear me? I was on mute.
We can hear you well.
Okay.
No, we
Great.
don't see you. If you want to present through audio, you can, but if you want to present with a video as well, you can turn your camera on, but I'll leave that up.
Okay. Thank you so much. So good evening. As a mother of a student entering kindergarten this year, I want to speak tonight to share my concerns on why the proposed catchment change is not safe or practical for the children living in Aberdeen. I also want to note that I started a petition against the boundary change in only a few short days, over 100 concerned families signed. The reasons the new proposal is not practical are as follows, and bear with me, there's quite a few. So number one, the proposed plan increases safety risk for our children. So this was brought up before, so I appreciate that. But with the current Pacific Way catchment, students living on Bentel, Talbot, Willowbrae, Rayburn, Galbraith, and Telford are attending Pacific Way, which means they do not cross Aberdeen Drive to get to school. As many members of our neighborhood are aware, Aberdeen Drive is very busy with numerous morning commuters speeding down the hill. In fact, due to residential concerns, the city of Kamloops recently had to set up a speed board program on this road in an attempt to slow speeders down. Thus, it is not safe to propose a catchment boundary change where there would be significant additional number of young children crossing the road. Second of all, the proposed plan significantly decreases walkability to school by numerous families. For instance, I live on Willowbrae, and in order to get my daughter to Aberdeen Elementary, I would have a significant distance to walk down Dunrobin to the stair path residing on Dunrobin, which connects to Aberdeen Drive. It is my hope that on my days off, I'd be able to walk my daughter to school. I also have a 2-year-old who I'd be walking with me at the same time, and I have to be pushing her in a stroller. The stair path on Dunrobin is made up of 55 stairs, so there's no way I could get her stroller safely down the steps. As another option to the Dunrobin Trail, I could walk down Abbey Lane Drive onto Aberdeen Drive. However, this is a significant hill to have to push a stroller up and down. Thus, I do not realistically see many parents able and willing to make this trek. Also, because of the steep topography, it decreases young children's ability to bike ride or scooter to their school, which how does decreasing walkability make sense in a time where childhood obesity is already a documented health concern? Thirdly, due to the increased safety issue and decreased walkability for many families, there would be most likely a significant increase in traffic. Upon observing the morning drop-off time in Aberdeen Elementary, it is already apparent that it is very busy with lack of parking. With the decreased walkability to the school, this drop-off time will be even more congested. How will this be addressed? Will more parking be provided? Also, with increased traffic to Aberdeen Elementary, this means more traffic from parents turning on and off of Aberdeen Drive to Van Horn Drive. This will not only impact traffic flow to the pedestrian crossing on Aberdeen Drive, but may also impact traffic congestion in all intersections within the lower Aberdeen area. Has this been considered? For instance, will a traffic light have to be installed? Also, has a traffic impact assessment through the city been conducted? Fourth, decreasing walkability directly opposes the City of Kamloops official community plan, which is called the OCP. The city's OCP encourages walkable neighborhoods to promote healthy communities. A goal of the OCP is, quote, to be a pedestrian-friendly community with networks that integrate with transit, neighborhood amenities, parks, open space, and schools. The proposed catchment change does not achieve the city's vision of achieving a walkable neighborhood by decreasing families' ability to easily walk to school, but rather forces families to drive their children to school. Number 5, the proposed plan for the boundary change is not practical. So as stated, I live on Willowbrae, and the fastest access to Aberdeen Elementary would be through the stair path on Dunrobin. The students who live on Dunrobin, however, are still able to attend Pacific Way Elementary. So how does it make sense that children living further away from Aberdeen Elementary are expected to attend the school? Also, children living in the Westerdale, Glenmore area usually are driven to school due to their distance from Pacific Way Elementary. Would it not be more practical to have the children in these areas attend Aberdeen Elementary, especially since these students can access Aberdeen Elementary through existing road networks off of Pacific Way? This would then allow the Pacific Way Elementary catchment to retain the students of Bentall, Talbot, Willowbrae, Rayburn, Galbraith, and Telford, who would then be able to walk or ride their bikes to school. Number 6, the timeline for the change is not realistic. So this was brought up before, but as noted, the childcare in our city is incredibly competitive. Thus, parents have to be on wait lists for 2 to 3 years in order to have their child enrolled. Parents would then have to pre-plan childcare options based on the current catchment boundaries, as there was only a number limited of facilities, as was discussed, that will drop off or pick up at various schools. So as a result, parents need more than a year's notice to change their childcare plans. 7, and this was already brought up too, but mental health of affected children will be significantly impacted. So the start of a school year is a difficult transition, as we know, for many children, and the current COVID-19 pandemic has further exacerbated this. Children who have made friends at Pacific Way will be forced to switch schools, creating additional mental health concerns for a future generation. Also, forcing a children in grade 6 to attend a new school with new friends in their final year of elementary school may create more anxiety with the transition into secondary school. Number 8, many families have been left out of the conversation. So only parents whose children are currently attending school were contacted about this catchment change. Parents like myself and many in my neighborhood who have a child entering kindergarten were actually not contacted. I only found out through a friend. Also, parents with younger children who will be entering school in the next few years have not been contacted about this. So I'm just wondering how it's appropriate to make such a major decision for a neighborhood without notifying all of the students within the area. In summary, our community is not opposed to a new catchment boundary change. We are aware that Pacific Way Elementary will soon be over capacity. However, the proposed boundary change is not practical, and so let's work together to make a better plan. So as a result, we've come up with maybe a suggested proposal for the catchment that demonstrates that there are other possible options worth seeking. So the proposal would then entail children living in the Westerdale Glenmore area who are usually driven to school due to their distance, again, as discussed, from Pacific Way Elementary, be located to Aberdeen Elementary. And then these students can access Aberdeen Elementary through existing road networks off of Pacific Way without creating further congestion on Aberdeen Drive. This would then allow the Pacific Way Elementary catchment to retain the students of Bentall, Talbot, Willowbrae, Rayburn, Galbraith, and Telford, who would then be able to ride their bikes or walk to school. This proposal also reflects the traditional catchment area of Aberdeen Elementary prior to the construction of the Pacific Way Elementary. So this proposal that we've come up with, I'm happy to share with anybody that is interested. So thank you for taking the time to listen to my concerns today.
Thank you. Oh, somebody has their mic on. Thank you very much, Ms. Beach, for your presentation. And I thank you also for your suggestions, and we will look at your suggestions, I can assure you of that. and we will respond to your questions. If you have a written presentation and you are working from a written presentation, if you can just email that to us on the link that's provided, the email link that has provided, we would appreciate that, because we want to make sure that board members receive all of the questions and the answers and the suggestions that are being made through this public consultation. So if you could send that to us through the link, we would appreciate that, and we'll respond to your questions. Thank you.
Thanks. It was already sent, just so you know.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I have some questions that have come in through YouTube and Facebook, and I'm just going to read those. Some of them we can respond to this evening. Some of them are going to have to wait until I get staff involved and post the responses. The first one is with respect to a new secondary school. If a new secondary school, I'm going to ask Mr. McDonald if he wants to comment on this, but it says that if a new secondary school is built in Aberdeen, do both Pacific Way and Aberdeen Elementary catchments go to the new Aberdeen Secondary School? Well, I think that's some years away because we have to choose a site first. And I think once we choose a site and get permission from the ministry or get the funds from the ministry to build a school, we would then have to make some determination of catchments. But Mr. McDonald, would you like to comment on that question? So if there's a new secondary school built in Aberdeen, do both Pac-Way and Aberdeen Elementary catchments go to the new Aberdeen Secondary School?
Yeah, we haven't gotten that far because we don't have any funding for the school. But yeah, I would assume they would, and that would be sometime in the future with no date to be able to give anybody at this time.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Mr. McDonald, and that's kind of where we are. So we don't have a site, but we anticipate that we eventually will get a site and get a high school approved in Aberdeen. And when that comes, we would certainly expect that the students from Pac-Way and Aberdeen would be attending that secondary school. Another question from YouTube. You say parents can apply for a variance, but how many of these would be granted? I'm not sure where that variance comes from. I know that I'm anticipating it would be students who would, as a result of the catchment change, would be out of catchment. Could they apply for a transfer to remain in the school where they are? My answer to that would be yes, but those transfer approvals would depend on whether or not there was space in that school. So there's a process, yes, that where parents can apply. There are also going to be some special cases, I'm sure, that we have not yet anticipated that will be brought to our attention. And we have to certainly look at those individual cases and respond to those in an appropriate way. Another question with respect to YouTube, and this is with respect to, will my daughter, who will be going into her 6th year at Pac-Way, really be asked to relocate to a school where she knows no one? So I'm assuming that your daughter would be going into her 6th year at Pac-Way this year or in September of 2022. So it would depend on the year, but we'll check on this further so that we can give you a specific response to your question. I expect it's also within the context of the previous question about those exceptionalities or exceptional circumstances where we would have to look at transfers or spaces that might be available in the existing school. But we would have to look at, I'm just not clear of the year, whether your daughter would be going into her 6th year in September of 21 or 6th year in September of 22. Another question from Mr. Fortan, who says he forgot to mention his house is on a cul-de-sac of Willowbrae Court, is located within I'm not sure the actual distance. 50 kilometers from the proposed zoning change, which for our children makes the difference of walking together to and from school for 10 minutes versus our little one, starting September the 23rd, walking by herself for 1.5 hours to go to Aberdeen. This makes her nervous, obviously, and does not feel right. We choose Pacific Way for reputation and the proximity. So we will make note of that comment, and we'll respond, Mr. Fortin, to your questions on our website. I'm not seeing any more questions, and I'm not seeing any more presentations. So it looks like it's time that we can complete our evening. If you have additional questions or comments that you would like to make, there may be some things that you heard tonight that you would like to think about. If you have further comments or questions, I would encourage you to take advantage of the opportunity and go to our website. There is a link there, as I mentioned, where you can send your comments or questions. So we can ensure that you will receive a response prior to the board making its decision on June the 14th. So all of those throughout the consultation, all of those questions and responses will be viewable throughout the consultation, so that the board will have all of those responses and all of those questions and all of those suggestions prior to its making a decision on June the 14th. So I want to thank you again for your attendance this evening, for your insight into the issues, for your suggestions and your questions, and we will do our best to give you a comprehensive response to all. So thank you again. Thank you again for your presence, and good evening.